All right, folks. So this is my definitive last for the foreseeable future test of my Google 6A cell phone camera versus my collection of other cameras. And I didn't even use all of them. I just used the ones I had on me. 90% of my shots that I've taken for golf videos, I've used either a Sony, I think it's an A7, which is the Sony version of the Konica Minolta um, CMOS camera or CCD camera, APS-C camera, and a Tamron 28-300 lens. I still look back on that now and think about it as a decent camera for the job, but at the same time, it does have some glaring faults, which I won't go into in detail. But basically, so the ones I have two Sony RX-100s, an M2 from Japan and an M4, and I bought the Japanese one really cheap. I think it was like $25 or $50 on eBay, and I thought that I would be able to change the language, flash in the BIOS to something that is English. And of course, Sony had blocked the BIOS and changed the firmware between the Mark II and Mark III and 4. So I ended up buying a Mark IV just so I could read the camera menu. Another interesting story for another day, but long story short story more interesting. Basically, over, I would say, the past 5 years or so, I've collected a D850. I got it cheap on eBay for like $400, and then had some nightmares with it, just doing stupid stuff in terms of driving around the country with it in my car. Forgot to take it out of the car and broke a lens in the camera. Very similar to what I did with the Sony A7, which is another reason why I have a collection of different cameras. The D300S I got basically to replace the original D300 I had years ago when they first came out, and they were $2,500 a piece. And I ended up getting that on eBay also for another $150, plus a bunch of matching Nikon 2880s, 3580s, and so forth to just go on the camera. I have a couple of other Nikon DSLRs that I've talked about in other videos. I'll mention here, I did not actually use them for this test. G1X I bought roughly the same time as I bought the D300S for about $150 on eBay. And so I have not included all my cameras, but they are all basically from the 2010 era that I was able to get at a later date, years later, on eBay for a fraction of what they were costing at the time they came out. And so I said, what the hell, I'll throw some haze filters on them and go ahead and take some shots with them, on the golf course while I'm playing. And they all pretty much did work out, but they all had the same problem. And the reason I did switch to using a cell phone camera instead, which was that they were awkward to carry around the golf course and take shots with while I was playing. So I ended up just starting with like my first cell phone camera. I've been using Samsungs before I bought this Google, and so 3 megapixel, 5 megapixel, 12 megapixel, and then I got this Pixel 6a, which is 24 megapixel, and it's always been an issue for me ever since I've had it, because the image quality and the image style is so very different from any other camera I've ever shot. Most cameras are very sort of real to life, at least they try to be. Google just blew a hole in all that. I think Sony started it, but Google really ran with the idea. Sony started with the image of cooked raw and modifying the raw data coming off the chip with on-chip processing to give you a more pleasant image than a real image, which is a traditional Nikon and to a large extent Canon photography. Sony said, screw all that. We're not going down that road. We're going off on this road. We're going to make images that people want to see on the sensor. When you start talking about double-sided sensors that have image processing on one side and the photo sensor RGB sensor on the other side. So I guess it's back-sided CMOS processing. Anyway, so they start off with Cook Raw, a little bit of noise reduction on a chip, a little bit of sharpening on a chip, and some basic image processing for looks and style, and then compression on top of it. It all gets done on the chip, and that started with the next camera after the A700. I think it was a 702. You go back into, or 720. Yeah, if you go back in time, that was, you know, early or mid 2000s, certainly before the recession of 2008, when nobody was selling anything. And essentially, that camera I had, the A700 camera, I've actually had 3 of them. One I bought for 500 on eBay, another one I bought for 300 on eBay with a lens, and a third one I bought to replace the one I broke when I was out playing golf and it slipped off my cart. And I was racing trying to get in, and it just, I had it sitting on my, I usually would play with it sitting on my cart and on my bench. And then this one time I was racing trying to finish the round when it was getting dark, and made this high-speed turn, and the thing went right off the side of the cart, snapped the lens, the plastic mount lens, right where it goes onto the camera. And I was so mad, I just chucked them both into the woods. I actually went out to the same course like a few years later. The camera's still sitting there in the woods. Anyway, so I learned from that. I'd spent quite a bit of money to do that, and I learned from that not to use DSLRs. I still did, of course, because I was just so accustomed to the IQ. At the time I was doing this shooting, cell phone cameras were just not IQ compatible or comparable with any real basic DSLR. Even a D40 I had back then taking shots would take better shots than my Samsung camera. That all changed dramatically when I got this Pixel 6a, which just had so many features that were not really even in the older, the year 2000, the year 2010s. Even the D850 I have struggles to compete with the Google Pixel 6a in terms of overall IQ, although the 6a does have problems that I will go into detail, some detail in this video, because I've already covered them in such detail in other videos, and I just wanted to just touch base. I found out, long story short, short story more interesting, having had these cameras in Utah for 6 months and having plenty of time to go out and pursue this little obsession of mine, it helps a lot if you're going to compare camera gear not to take a whole lot of pictures at a lot of different places and do it. There are things that you learn along the way, yes, but after having done this for 6 months or so now, I now know how to do a coherent test with these cameras. Pick a spot, one spot, maybe take shots from 2 different directions. I took shots here back at the cliffs to the north with various different focal lengths. From the 6A will shoot at 24 millimeter and 35 millimeter effective at the 1X setting. The 0.6 is like 15 millimeter and 35 millimeter effective, and the 2X is roughly 47, 50, just short of twice the 2X and the 1X. So 24, 25, and then it goes to about 50. And I wanted to see what the difference was. One of the things that I've seen in some of the shots is some pixelation due to the fact that it's 2X digital zoom. The other problem was the compression and the noise reduction and the JPEG compression specifically, and just creates some really funky non-linear artifacts in the image, and I wanted to examine that. And then I wanted to just look at the other cameras and just see, taking raw shots, taking JPEGs, camera JPEGs, just to see what the difference was in terms of IQ and so forth, looking at the raw data. not going, really deep like 250x or percent magnification or anything, using these standard tools that are available with Ubuntu. I have GNOME, Gimp, dcraw, RawTherapee, nothing really outrageous. I'm not talking about tone curves in Photoshop or Premiere or anything like that, from Adobe. I haven't bought a copy of Adobe in my life. I've had some demo copies that I've worked with, and it's okay as it is, but I'm not someone who's a professional or an expert at Photoshop or anything like that. I am aware of what they can do, and I'm definitely aware of doing image processing in Gimp. Certainly I've done a lot of image processing in Gimp for many years, and I've also worked somewhat with dcraw. I've worked through all the menu options and so forth. And just as an aside, the main dcraw setting that you need to use if you're going to use it to match up with RawTherapee is a -W4T for TIFF, and you don't want to use the let dcraw auto brighten the image, and use the W4 setting. So I forget the exact details off the top of my head. You can look it up in the dcraw manual if you want to look at that. I tried not to get into anything to do with the video processing of the video that comes off the Google 6A or any of the other cameras. You can go and mess around with open source tools to extract pixels and extract frames and do things like that. Like the video that I have on here, I did not do that. Not really my interest. Again, if you want to do that kind of stuff, there's plenty of documentation out there for tools that are available open source to do that. And just as there are plenty of tools that you can use to do video processing like Blender, I'm not trying to get into any of that. I'm just looking at acquiring some decent video and some decent images for basic documentation purposes, like a basic photographer would do, just something semi-professional, not trying to set the world on fire here, okay? So the idea was just to go through these cameras and make sure that they were reasonably comparable in terms of image quality, with the exception of the 6A, because it does such a intense job of automating, using their computational photography theory, of automating the processing, the image processing of the photos and the video that are on this camera. And you will see that in the next video, which I'm about to show right now. Let's see here. Okay, so this scene is the scene that I shot from. It's a small mesa on the western exit of the Kaibab National Forest, which is about 75 miles northwest of the Grand Canyon on the north rim side. I ended up taking the drive out there. Just said, I screwed around with this all day because I didn't want to really screw around with taking 4 DSLRs out there. And I ended up saying, fine, I'll just take 2. I'll take the highest resolution one I have, the lowest resolution one I have. I took the D300S because I just like shooting it for a 12 megapixel camera. It gives me pretty darn good results for a $150 DSLR with a $50 lens on it. It does do a very good job for giving you basic images. And the 850 is, twice the linear resolution of the D300S. It also has some additional tricks that it can pull, like the HDR in camera. And I did want to try that also, shooting as the sun went down. The sun does tend to go down fast this time of year in the mountains. So when I started taking these shots, it was just a nice sunny day. The sun was about 40, maybe 45 degrees up in the air. So one of the things it does is we collect a lot of pictures. Certainly when you're doing image processing, you do a lot of revisions and there's a lot of images. The basic images that you see here, the cover shots are the camera JPEGs off the 6A. The original ones are DNG files of the raw data supposedly coming off the image processor. So I used, what is it? Oh God, I can't remember the name here. RawTherapee to process the DNG files, and then I used Gimp to process the original files, or the cover files, which are basically your thumbnails for the raw files. And that's all pretty straightforward. So I'm not going to go into detail on this. I'm just going to tell you, I didn't even crop the screenshots. I just took a bunch of screenshots, and what I've got here, and I've got to figure out exactly what rate to show them at, is some of the shots that I took. I mean, I took this shot with the D850 using the HDR and the regular camera mode of the sunset. That took me quite a bit of processing. The left side, I show the, I think that's the RawTherapee shot, the modifications on the left, and the original is on the right. One of the two, probably the brighter one, is the actual camera shot. And so you have the original shot without HDR, and then you have the shot with HDR, and that is going to give you a set of options in the camera for adjusting the bracket dimension. It does take two shots in HDR mode and blends them, which is nice to be able to do when you want just a decent shot. You don't want to have to set up a tripod, take a 5-shot bracket, and then blend them back together in whatever blending tool you use, HDR blending tool. So you can sit there in front of your computer all day long and play around with this stuff. And I basically got back to my apartment around 9 o'clock that night, sat down, played with these images. I played with this particular shot for about 3 hours, trying to get it to look decent. And this is the one strong point of the 6A compared to any other DSLR slash point and shoot, from the 2000s or 2010s. It has really good color, and it does a very good job of handling all of the large scale image processing that you pretty much want to do with a cell phone. And I always like to take shots with it whenever I'm out taking shots with my DSLRs or other cameras, because it's just nice to have a nice reference. It is a good intensity, color, IQ reference that I like to use, just as using the camera JPEGs. And one thing I've learned is always take the camera JPEGs and the RAW files whenever possible. Although the problem is when shooting, HDR, both my Mach 4, my RX-100 Mk 4 Sony, and this camera will take in-camera HDR. The Sony is actually pretty good. It has a lot of the features that this camera has, the 6A has. It just isn't quite as thin as the 6A. It still has to, you still have to turn it on and extract the lens, and it's not quite as good at the HDR and dynamic range optimization settings as the 6A is. It's like first or second generation, whereas the 6A is like, sixth generation. Obviously, I'm not saying it matches the number, but certainly it's much more advanced in terms of doing these advanced image processing steps than the Sony is. And the Sony is not quite as good as the D850 is, but the D850 is not that great at blending. And the same thing with pretty much all these cameras. When you're shooting blending in the camera handheld, you can find that in some of the shots you will get some registration errors that are more increasingly obvious the greater the exposure gap between the two shots. So in this case, it didn't really have much of an exposure gap, and you can't really see it there at full screen. I didn't really go in and look at it at half screen. It just wasn't really worth the effort of digging into it that deep for this shot, because you can't see any registration errors here at full screen. Okay, and I'm looking at now on like maybe a 12-inch display, 12-inch image, and the video is not quite filling. I mean, it's all going to depend on what size monitor you're looking at. If you're looking at it on a 1080p monitor, you see one thing. You look at it on your cell phone, you see another thing. You look at the back of the camera, you see another thing. These are 3-inch displays. And if you have a 27, 36, 54-inch display, which now, crazily enough, you can buy at Walmart for like $200 for a 4P 56-inch display. It's insane how good things have gotten since when I was just starting doing this back in the 1990s and working on image processing when I worked my second job out of college, let's say. Just amazing stuff that you can buy now for almost nothing compared to what it used to be available for. But the thing that I'm going to just mention this one time, when we were all shooting on film back in the 70s and 80s, okay, before even 3 megapixel DSLRs and points and shoots were popular, before all that, there used to be an entire career that people had of processing film and doing this stuff with, just loops and or loop haze, whatever you call them, and you'd sit there and they would hand edit the film or the negatives that or the printouts. They'd go in there and it'd actually paint in all the little gaps in the film, and they painstakingly change the chemistry, and blend different negatives and different prints and use different chemistry to get these color changes. It was insane, the stuff that people would do, and the cost and the time that you can do now sitting down at your desk and clicking a few buttons. And I still spent at least 3 hours trying to get this one picture right. Just never get it, never did it, never gave up on it. I just basically gave up on it. I have a shot here following from the 6A where I pointed it at the sun, and the sun wasn't even as high as it was when I took the D50 shot, because I took it like maybe 15 minutes later and came back and took the same shot with my 6A. I almost forgot to take shots with the 6A and ended up taking them last. So the scenes I took with the 6A were brightened in the camera, largely uniform because it was largely uniform. There's almost no sun really out. And then it just lifted the exposure to like normal 0 EV exposure. I had to actually go in and lower the exposure by a stop to get it to be even reasonable. I took some other shots that I'm not showing here because I just took the shots that I wanted to take while I had some light, and some shots I took were, shots of the moon, after it come out full moon and stuff like that, and just shots I don't really want to show here. But it handles the lower light levels better than my 850 did. And one of the problems that I had with my 850 was as I zoomed out with this lens, and definitely, no question, you can't really get the zoom out with the 6A that you can get with a decent camera, and even like a 135 lens or something. But you can get something decent. You can get about 50 millimeter effective using the 2X. And what it tends to do is it tends to take the 1X shot and then apply digital zoom, literally. So you're not really going to get more than a 24, 25 millimeter effective shot out of the 6A. And aside from the issues of how good the IQ is, if you're shooting RAW with the 6A or shooting camera JPEG, then you've got to understand that with the 6A, the trade-off is the portability and the image processing versus the limited zoom length of cropping, digitally cropping a 24 millimeter shot in 35 millimeter format. You're only going to be able to see so much by doing that, full image, without just getting ridiculous amounts of distortion. I'd say roughly 120% is going to be about the connoisseur level of usability of this camera. But the other thing is that for a lot of DSLR lens, like your beginner lens, like your Rebel lens would be like a 35 to 120. A lot of the cheaper Nikon lenses are 3580s or 2880s or something like that. It's you really have to go to the third-party lenses to get lenses with like a 150, 200, 300 millimeter focal length range, okay? And so those are not expensive now at all, but they're definitely not small. They're reasonably small, but not small. The difference between my D850 with a 28 300 lens and the Nikon 2880 lens is almost negligible in terms of the lens length. The 2880 lens is a good size lens. You start talking about the 24-125, which is at least 3 times heavier and almost the same length. And you know, like a VC lens for the Nikon, which is going to be like 3 pounds and longer than the 28-300 without VC, which is the lens I broke on my D850. These lenses are big, heavy lenses, okay? Serious lenses. But to get any long shots at any kind of close-up perspective, you know, those are the lenses you're going to have to use. The 6A just cannot do that. And I have shot the D300 with the 2880 to take the shots that I took for this video, and there's nothing like the coverage that you're going to see with the Tamron 28-300 on the D850 and looking over these shots. So, but I don't want to go into them in detail because basically all the real cameras had just about the same resolution, 12, 24, 20, you know, 12 for the D300 and the G1X, 24 for the 6A and the Sony RX-100, and I probably should put that in the shots. I'll put that in the screenshot, and then you know, 42 for the D850. But in a practical sense, there really was very little difference in terms of the resolution, even for the 6A at 1x. But the problem is that that is wide angle for any DSLR, 24 millimeters at 35 millimeter effective. That is a solid wide angle right there at 1x, and you're not going to get much more than that 2x, maybe 2.2 or something before you start running into trouble with IQ, just from the distortion. So just look at them. I'm not saying that they're significant. I'm just saying that they're there to convince you of what I have just said. Enjoy looking at them for the next, I'm going to put them up there like maybe 10 seconds a piece, and enjoy looking at them for the next 5 minutes. I'll not make them so slow that they're going to take more than 5 minutes. 27 seconds, 27 minutes of audio, plenty for this topic. The rest is just to convince the doubting Thomasism on the crowd. Enjoy. Okay, so just a couple extra notes here. These are all screenshots. As you can see, they're showing a whole desktop. One thing one should be careful of when one does this, and you don't go back and have either an hour or two to hand crop the screen, the part of the image that you're not trying to show, like the toolbar at the bottom and the date and time at the top, is try to make sure you don't put your personal information on your videos so that people can see that when you're producing videos. But the other thing is, I wanted to just mention that these were all basically sorted by time order. The name, the screenshot plus date and time, as you may or may not have seen in other systems. It's all but sorted by date and time. So I took out a few of the other shots that I didn't want to show, put a few earlier in the beginning. But also I wanted to say here at the end, especially, that these, I went back in this morning to look at specifically at the issue of the raw shots in DNG format on a 6A compared to the raw shots that I took with the 850 at roughly the same focal lengths. The 1X and 2X, I already said, are approximately 24 millimeter and 52 millimeters on the 6A. So I have some shots that I took again at another point a little later. One of the problems that you see with the light changing is the sun dropping below the clouds on a nice cloudy day where there's scattered broken clouds, you're going to see the light change often as the sun moves across the sky and goes behind clouds. And on top of that, on this day, it was exceptionally windy, and I was out there standing, shaking my whole upper body. I've got the camera. The sand is blowing from behind me. Luckily, I blocked most of it, but not all of it. Had to clean the lenses off and so forth a couple of times before I stored them. The lens barrel also had some dust and sand on it, and I'm taking handheld shots the whole time. No stops, no rest, no tripod for sure. Out there shooting these shots. And one of the things I want to show is some of the amazing IQ that you get doing this, even though the focal point might be different on different shots. Certainly the 6A, it's a contrast focus system with the other cameras. I think the Sony and the G1X also uses a contrast focus. But with the DSLRs, it's point focus, phase focus, and so if you don't get a good contrast there, you're not getting a good focus. So what was stunning me about a lot of this was how well these shots came out. Even though it's a timid looking scene, there's some real fine detail out there. There's some color detail out there, and I purposefully chose a scene where I had foreground detail running out into the distance. One of the things that's very important to do these tests is you don't want a flat scene where almost everything's at the same distance. You need something where you can use the depth of field and see the depth of field of the shot. So you want something that runs away from you, and you get different depths of field at different focus distances. So this was good for that. But I thought I'd also throw in a couple of shots well beyond the limit of what I could get out of the 6A using the D850 and Tamron 850. And hopefully, yes, that will fill up the entire time of interest for everyone who's watching this right now, including myself.